Ladies and gentlemen, our session will be beginning in a few minutes. Please find your seats and silence your cell phones. Once again, our session will be starting in a few minutes. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our session. Please find your seats. Once again, we are beginning our session immediately.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming back. Can we just give a round of applause for that first panel, please? I just need them. Thank you. I'm Bianca Williams. I am a proud Duke alum from the Bronx, New York, grew up in Orlando, Florida, and went to school in North Carolina for a really long time. So thank you to Dr. Neal and the Department of African and African American Studies for inviting me to moderate this panel on activism then and now, an intergenerational conversation. I'm very grateful for the over 11 years of student activism and organizing I was able to participate in here on this campus as a member of the Black Student Alliance and President's Council on Black Affairs as an undergrad, as president of the Zora Neale Hurston and CLR James Society as a graduate student in cultural anthropology, and as a former administrator described me during my time here as a general troublemaker. I wear that badge proudly. Organizing in this space taught me a lot about how institutional power operates, how much transformational power a community committed to change and determination can create, and has influenced my organizing in the movement for Black Lives, Me Too, and my work as a professor. I would not be here, so many of us would not be here, without the sacrifice, struggle, and victories of all of you who participated in our Building Takeover. Thank you very much. We're often seen and heard because you see and hear us. Your actions make our experiences visible in an institution where we often feel unseen. While many of us were just able to survive this institution and survive predominantly white institutions, many of us thrived because of the community relationships, strategizing, and support you all modeled for us. And we saw a lot of that today on the panel, so thank you for that also. I first learned about the Allen Building Takeover as a first-year student in 1998 when Dr. Brenda Armstrong told the story at the Black Student Alliance's orientation event. I watched over the next 10 years as an undergrad and grad student as she told the same story to all of us, to the new students, with fire, emotion, and the preacher's tone she told it during my first year. It was clear that she wanted us to know who had fought and made room for us. She wanted us to know that there were people who understood what we were about to experience as Black students at Duke and that they were available to cover us. She wanted us to never forget our history. And Dr. Armstrong wanted to be clear that there was a legacy of excellence, of commitment, and social transformation that she and others expected us to contribute to. And I hope we have made you proud. I want to thank Dr. Armstrong for all she did for us, for all the mentoring, guidance, and waymaking, and for allowing us to benefit from her decades of labor. To her family, I know I speak for many when I say she will never, ever be forgotten. So as I spoke to my co-panelists about what our goals for the session were, we pointed to two. One, that we share and teach each other, teach the audience, teach people watching on the live stream, a history at Duke that sometimes is forgotten and sometimes is actively erased. And then we wanted to make sure that we shared the different perspectives and contexts that each of these generations experienced at Duke, how we can work together across generations to make change. And so with that, I want to start to introduce the panelists. I'm going to sit for this part. So right here is Dr. Fuller. Dr. Howard Fuller's career includes many years in both public service positions in the field of education. He is a distinguished professor of education and the founder, director of the Institute for the Transformation of Learning at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Immediately before his appointment at Marquette University, Dr. Fuller served as the superintendent of Milwaukee Public Schools from 1991 to 1995. He currently sits on a long list of boards, so he does a lot of work, a lot of public service. And his memoir, No Struggle, No Progress, was published in 2014. And as you heard during the first panel, he was a very important and significant advisor to those who decided to take over the Allen Building and later created the Malcolm X Liberation University, which I hope he speaks a little bit more as we get to the panel. Anastasia Karkliniya is class of 14 and 21, graduated from Duke with a bachelor's degree in African American Studies and Political Science in 2014. She's been involved in various campus movements, from starting Occupy Duke, launching Duke Students for Justice in Palestine, organizing with the Students for a Democratic Society, and other radical collectives such as Duke Engage, and co-founding Duke Graduate Students Union, SEIU Local 27. You've been busy also. She was a member of the coalition of students and workers that took over the Allen Building in 2016, carrying on that legacy, and served as the media liaison during the 8-day sit-in. Currently, Anastasia is a PhD candidate in the literature department, where she specializes in 20th century Black literature and cultural theory. Can you hear me? Miss Janice Williams is class of 72, the Women's College graduate with a BA in psychology. She has worked as a social worker for over 40 years in Durham, with the exception of 3 years in Fayetteville. She wanted to make that clear. She has 2 children, one of whom we have the pleasure of having on the panel today, Terrain, and 4 grandchildren. She believes that the greatest impact she can have on the future is through her efforts and care to leave a better world for the generations to come. Her attention throughout her career has been the good and well-being of children, with a focus on children in foster care. Next to Miss Janice is Terrain, her son, graduated with a BS in biology from Duke in 1993. He was a member of the Black Student Alliance for all 4 years he was at Duke and served as an officer for 2. He was a member of the PCOBA, President's Council on Black Affairs, and he has been active with the Black Alumni Association for many years, serving as an executive officer, and served as a member of the Duke Alumni Association Board. He lives in Durham with his wife and 3 kids, and is currently employed with the American Kennel Club as the Director of Engineering. And we have Sydney. Sid Roberts is a Marxist, prison abolitionist, and senior at Duke in the literature department. Their freshman year, they were on one of the 9 student occupiers in the 2016 Allen Building Takeover. Since then, they have been involved with labor organizing and racial justice campaigns on campus, most recently with the People's State of the University. In Durham, Sid works with the Inside Outside Alliance, SEIU, and the Carolina Justice Policy Center. After graduation, they plan on working as a union organizer and then attending law school. So these are my co-troublemakers, both on and off campus. So I wanted to start the panel by giving each panelist a few minutes to talk about how they came to Duke, and Durham in this area, and the significance of the Allen Building takeover to them, to have these multiple kind of generations represented and to show the significance of the Allen Building to all of us. So please, I guess I'll start with Dr. Fuller.
So thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I came to Durham at May 3rd, 1965 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Not that I remember. But I came to work for Operation Breakthrough. This was after the Great Society program had been created, and so they created these community action organizations around the country. Bob's here, he wrote this book called To Right These Wrongs, where he talked about the North Carolina Fund, because the North Carolina Fund preceded the Office of Economic Opportunity. And so a lot of the way that the Office of Economic Opportunity was organized came from some of the work of the North Carolina Fund. So Operation Breakthrough was one of those community action agencies. And I think they thought I was pretty safe. Like I had a master's degree in social work. I was young. So they hired me to run a neighborhood center in Hayti. They had 3 areas. It was real creative, area A, B, and C. So Hayti was area A. And then there was where poor white people were. I forgot what part of town it was again. I remember it, but it was area B, and then it was out in the county. So when I came, I actually thought the idea was to eliminate poverty. When they said, like, we're going to have a war I was like, hell, we can win this war, right?
Right.
So I like came, okay, cool, we're gonna end poverty. And so one of the first things I realized was that it was hard to fight a war when you had the enemy on the board. And so one of the greatest slumlords in Durham, Greenberg, this dude was on the board. So I started going out, knocking on doors, and one of the doors I knocked on was a woman named Ann Atwater, who just passed, and they're getting ready to do a film on her, Best of Enemies, because of the relationship of her and the Klan dude. And Taj, what's her name, is going to play Ann. But anyway, so let me try to, so that's why I was here, right? And so as a community organizer, one of the things I decided to do, and I thought Chuck was going to talk about, is that I decided to well, let me go backwards. So after I got here, one of the first things I did was start organizing neighborhood councils all around the city. And one of them we organized was in McDougal Terrace. And we formed a group called the Mothers Club, because our assumption was nobody would be against mothers. But wrong. And so Joyce Thorpe, who was the president, they tried to evict her for being the president of the Mothers Club. This went all the way up to the Supreme Court, which caused this whole idea that you couldn't put people out of housing projects without giving them a reason. That started with our organizing work. And so as we were doing all of this organizing, they finally put me over all of the areas. And then they wanted me to come back to Chicago because I got this reputation as an organizer. And North Carolina said, no, we want you to stay in North Carolina. So they moved me over to the North Carolina, or I moved over to the North Carolina Fund. And they put me in charge of 11 counties throughout North Carolina to do the same kind of organizing work in those 11 counties that we were doing in Durham. And so what I did, I decided to train black college students to become organizers. And so I went around the state, and Nelson and Joyce know about this, Peggy knows about it, and Chuck. So Chuck and Peggy were both CATs. We call them community action technicians. And so we trained them, and then we put them out in communities to actually do actual organizing. Nelson had organized GAP in Greensboro. So I'm telling you all this because there's a connection here between this and the Allen Building Takeover. Because one of the things Chuck talked about was his organizing strategies. I think he learned a lot of that during that summer working as a technician. But the other thing that they learned was that there was a complete dichotomy between what they were learning at Duke and what they had seen during that summer. So in addition to the other realities that they were going through, they were doing that. So when they decided to take over the Allen Building, as I was telling Nelson, like we were organizing a group called Students Organization for Black Unity, because we were trying to organize all black students. And then there was going to be a counter organization. So we were headed to Atlanta to do battle with the counter organization. But first I had a speech at Bennett. And so I spoke at Bennett, and it wasn't no cell phone call and no text. Somebody told me, they done took over the building at Duke. So then I came back, they let me in through the window. And Nelson came, and Ben Ruffin was also, so that was the connection back to the community. So we were all in the building with them. So I won't go into all those stories, but it got interesting as it got darker in terms of people's view about what they were going to do. But the thing I want to mention and then stop is that you can't understand this without understanding the total context of what was happening at that period, not only in this country, but what was happening in Durham. And if anybody needs a statue on Duke's campus, it's Oliver Harvey. If y'all want to do something, y'all should fight to get a statue of Oliver Harvey on Duke's campus. Because in the 1940s, this short black man, I don't think Mr. Harvey was like 5'2", right? In the 1940s, they stood up against Duke. 1940s, they were trying to get a union formed at Duke University, right? And so some of what happened, with the Allen Building takeover also had been generated by the vigil. And that's another crucial event in Duke's history, right? Because after Martin Luther King was killed, the students at Duke had a vigil in the quad, I think for 10 days or 14 days or something like that. And I know Bertie was really involved in that. But that was a fight to try to get Local 77 to be unionized. And so all of those currents were operating when, you know, Chuck and CB, when all of them decided to like have Black Week and then the Allen Building Takeover. The last thing I'll mention, then I'm done, is, and there's actually, I just sent it to them, but there's actually a video of the creation of Malcolm X Liberation University. Because what happened is the Duke students, the Black students, were supposed to leave Duke. CB gave a speech that you all should see, where at St. Joseph's Church.
That's you?
Yeah.
I was wondering who that
Yeah, that was
was.
him.
That was a fierce
Yeah,
speech,
that was
bro.
fierce, right?
That was
He
fierce.
was like, we got like 3 options.
And
like,
your fro was fabulous.
Yeah, it was, and that's what he said. Like, yeah, 3 options. Either gonna leave Duke, or we could destroy the place, right? And then he looked around, because everybody was like, yeah. Or we can withdraw. And so what they were supposed to do was all of these Black students were supposed to quit Duke and come to Malcolm X Liberation University. And the way that Malcolm X Liberation University, where the name came from, and you all should have mentioned this, they put Malcolm X on the building when they took over the Allen Building. If you look at the photographs, it's like Malcolm X, right? And then there's a photograph of them, and it's called Malcolm X Liberation School. But the Black students were leaving Duke, and we organized the students from North Carolina Central. And you got to understand how important North Carolina Central was to supporting all this stuff that was going on. People from the community, we met at 5 Points as a symbolic, you are now being brought into our community. Leaving Duke and being accepted into the Black community. And then we had this huge rally at St. Joseph's. And that's the one where you're speaking and all of that. So I could go on and on, so let me just stop. But I do want you to understand, like, Frantz Fanon wrote a book called Wretched of the Earth. And in this book, he said, every generation out of relative obscurity must discover its mission and either fulfill it or betray it. So every generation, right, has got to decide, like, what's going to be my struggle? What am I going to take up? And so these students, at that point in time, took up that struggle as a part of the continuing struggle, right? Because clearly, you got a racist in the White House, one of the most despicable human beings walking the face of the earth. And so it tells you that there was the Allen Building, but hey, this is what we got today, right? And so for me, this is all good, and it's nice to see everybody, but it's about regenerating, like, the fight, right? Because the fight has to go on.
Thank you, Dr. Fuller. I just really want to encourage folks. The video that Dr. Fuller is talking about is in the Facebook group for the event, for this event, and it's only like 10 minutes long. It was a history of Black students at Duke that I had never heard about. And again, I've been here a long time, and I didn't know anything about Malcolm X Liberation University. And I think that speaks to some of kind of the disconnect sometimes generationally, but also the active erasure of particular stories, right? So I want to encourage you to go and check out that video. Anastasia, please tell us how you got here and what the Allen Building Takeover meant to you.
Absolutely. I, similarly to Dr. Williams, have been at Duke for a long time, both for my undergraduate degree and currently pursuing my PhD. I'm an international student, so I got here by way of Latvia, Eastern Europe, where I grew up until I was 16. And so I got to Duke as a first-year international student, not really expecting to sit here or do anything what I do now. But I guess my experience with activism at Duke upon getting here was utter shock. I think in some ways I came as an international student thinking that a university in America is going to be a place of riot and rebellion and all of this radical action. And I was very confused. I didn't know I came to the South. I didn't understand what the South was. I thought I came to America. And I was,
Which is,
yeah. And it was very interesting. Now looking back at it, I just had no sense where I was coming from. I thought I was going to United States, to university. And it was very confusing. I kind of observed US politics right around when President Obama was elected. And so as an outsider coming in some ways I was very much sold the idea of post-racial America, right? And so I came in with some of my other leftist interests, really interested in a lot of social justice issues, but not realizing that race was not only pertinent at Duke, but in the South or the United States more broadly, or the world. And so I came, and there was a very stark divide for me in terms of how international students approached some of the issues versus what was kind of the main discourse on campus. And my starting point with activism at Duke began with the Occupy Wall Street movement. As this movement was taking place in the United States, but also spreading internationally, I ended up adding like 70 friends I had on Facebook and just sending out a message to all the people I knew at Duke in kind of this enraged misunderstanding of why we're not doing something, why something is not happening. And one thing led to another. We started an Occupy Duke sit-in or sleep-in. I don't really know how to describe it. But we essentially occupied what now is Able Quad in front of the Duke Chapel, and ended up starting what would define my own experience at Duke, both in terms of protest, but also in terms of political education that goes beyond the classroom, and the kind of building of communities that are interested in thinking about radical change, thinking about social justice beyond the textbooks, right? Beyond what we learn in the classroom, but really taking it outside to campus and to the university. And so from one thing to another, I ended up pursuing an African American studies major, ended up working at Duke Archives that exposed me to the history of protests at Duke, to the history of Allen Building Takeover. And as we organized with some of the people in the room, as well as Sydney later on, there was this pervasive sense of having protests, having certain task forces and committees, but not really getting anywhere, not really being able to shift things in a sustainable or some kind of radical way that would actually make a difference. And I think at some point, we came together following a series of events that involved alleged abuse of a parking attendant here at Duke. And we looked back and realized that a lot of concerns, a lot of grievances that we had were actually the demands from 1969 that have not been fulfilled, that have not been taken seriously in terms of radical changes that needs to happen at the university. And that was our inspiration for really sitting with the demands, really sitting with the past history of people who came before us, who sacrificed, who protested, and then realizing in 2016 that we were in many ways in similar places with these demands being unmet. And so arriving on Duke's campus as an international student, never really thought we would take over the building for 8 days. And so I was very lucky to work with a lot of undergraduate and graduate students to facilitate that takeover. And my particular role was to facilitate media coordination and do kind of the communication works around that. Mm-hmm.
Do I understand? So I'm shifting.
Go ahead.
That you want to know what my role was.
I want to know what brought you to Duke, what your role was in the takeover. Why is the takeover so meaningful to you?
Okay. So actually what brought me to Duke was my mom. I did not say what the rest of the panelists had said, is that you take that PSAT, you become a national achievement finalist, but on that test, when you took it, you filled it out, you checked a box that said you were a Negro student. And when you did that, and it asked you what 3 schools did you want them, they would, send you information on them. You were supposed to pick a shoe-in school, a school you would really want to go to and thought you should be able to go to, and then a dream school. And so you put your 3 schools down, and NES, the National Scholarship Service for Negro students, would send you a write-up on your 3 schools, and they would recommend 2. And they recommended Antioch and Duke. Never heard of them. And my uncle came by to visit, and he told my mom he'd been to Durham, he'd been in the Army, that Durham was a very nice place for Negroes, and that he thought that I would do okay. So my mama said, you're going to Duke. So that's how I got here. Right. Okay, that's what you do. When I got to the Allen building, so I'm busy being a freshman, pulled in by Kat and Bertie with their dashikis and their afros and all of that, and trying to get a feel for coming from public school that was not top-notch academic high school, but coming from that school and trying to find my way here. Just beginning to notice, and I shared with you earlier, at first, you're happy and you got all of this, and then you begin to notice, wait a minute, that's not fair, that's not fair. Followed them, like, okay, something needs to happen, what we're gonna do, I'm in, I'm game. And my role in the Allen building was to make sure I was on that truck, make sure I jumped off that truck, and I'm thinking, I am not athletic, never been athletic. Lord have mercy, don't let me fall on my face jumping off this truck. Jump off the truck, get in that door, make sure that, and believe it or not, my partner was Bill Turner. And we had to make sure the door was chained and secured, and I had to take whatever it was that I had in my arms into that I had to do. Is that? And then the role was to join them and take notes and do all the rest of the things that we're doing, just to actively share and participate. So I found myself in my, at 68 now, my memory is not the best. So I have to take my time and really process stuff. And the political climate, thank you, Howard. I really loved your recap of a lot of that. The political climate on campus was, as a freshman, y'all heard this, so I'm going to rip through it real quickly. There was no academic support without judgment. There was no place to feel welcomed and safe in seeking for help with your feelings, whatever those feelings were. There were no courses for us or about us. There were no events for us, so we sought out involvement at NCCU. We went over there to participate in cultural events. Off campus, remembering that this was less than 1 year, so it was my senior year in high school that Malcolm X got assassinated. And so you come here and you hoping for something more positive. And I'm sorry. Durham felt alive with the building political power. I came from Huntsville, Alabama, 13% black. I went to Robert E. Lee High School. I told y'all that. I was one of 10 in the school of 2000. So I came and I was so excited because unlike Michael, who was used to seeing a lot of blacks, I was used to seeing very little, just like what you saw. So there was focus on empowering black leaders. There was increasing collaborative efforts with the white leaders that I saw, like with Ann Atwater. So I'm coming in then not, so I missed a lot that you shared. And there was a push to increase the cultural events that involved and featured the black artists. And so I was really excited about getting to know them, getting to read about them, getting to see them and witness that. And so it was a very exciting time for me as a freshman, and it contributed to a lot for me. Now, the impact on me with activism was that it developed a deep sense of appreciation of my parents' struggles. So now I can relate, isn't that what teenagers say, they just keep on waiting, you're gonna keep on living. It strengthened my interdependence skills. So I had independent skills, but I didn't have interdependent skills like I should have, and a desire to be a part of the changes that were needed. And as I matured, I was struggling with figuring out how am I contributing to the problem. And I need to also work and fix myself, and as best I can if I'm going to work with others on change and not just focus on their faults or their problems. So from that, I guess you all can figure out, I became a social worker. And I worked in child welfare, as you stated, my 45 years. Now I'm still working in there. And that I found is my purpose in life, is to help children. So I do want y'all to know that I sit here, I got some people out there, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I'm one of the founding members of DBA, which we call DoBack. I was a student at Malcolm X University. I was a member and an officer with the Afro-Am Society and then DoBack. I actually sat on the BUD committee as the student representative in deciding what to do about academics. And in the community then, as a social worker, I joined the Black Social Workers, the North Carolina Black Social Workers, the Triangle Association of Black Social Workers. I most recently, a few years back, served on President Broadhead's committee in looking at the 50-year anniversary of first Black students at Duke and what that meant and where we should go from there. I'm tired.
It's good. I hear you. You've done a lot.
Yeah.
So, Terrain, your grandmother told your mom to come here. Did your mom tell you to come here?
No.
Tell that story.
My mom was a teacher. She told you, I'm a social worker. Feelings.
So, Terrain, how'd you get here?
So my parents let the choice be completely mine as to where I wanted to go to school. And Duke being a great school and right in my backyard, in town, because after they graduated from Duke, they left for 3 years, came back, and so made roots here. So Central was right across the street from my house. Duke was, 10 minutes away. We were on Duke's campus all the time for football games. So when I decided to start looking at colleges, was looking at a lot of schools. Duke was one of my top choices. It was the bottom of the top choices because it was too close to home, and my parents would be able to get to me anytime they wanted, but it was on that list. And then when I came over and visited campus my senior year and was visiting the campus, it was during Black Student Weekend. So the number of Black college-age kids is about 3 times the amount of normal Black students on campus at any other time of the year. There are lots of other people visiting, so it was tons of Black people everywhere, Black students. That experience, that weekend, really sold me on the school, and I was like, yeah, that's where I want to go.
And then
and you also got to remember, I grew up knowing a lot about Duke because at my house, Brenda, Gwen, Bertie, my mom would sit around the house talking about the Allen Building Takeover. They didn't talk about it the way they've talked about it here, so I didn't hear all of the reasons why they were doing it. I didn't hear about the weeks and months that followed the Allen Building Takeover. Most of what I heard about was the day and the experience and the emotions of it, and sneaking out through the window of the back so that they actually weren't still in the Allen Building when they finally broke in. I was hearing those details, and I knew that why they had done it was because they felt like the Black students on campus weren't being treated well and weren't getting what they needed. But I didn't hear about all the other details around about the changes. So from my perspective, growing up, 10-year-old here, and they did Allen Building Takeover to fix things on campus for the Black students, I'm thinking they're fixed. So 10 years later, when I'm going, I'm thinking, okay, all the Black problems are fixed at Duke. And I visit the campus, and there's tons of Black students everywhere, so I'm thinking the problems are fixed at Duke. So when I get here, I wasn't planning on being an activist. I was planning on being a doctor, going to school, acing my classes, graduating and going on to be a doctor. When I got here, the first day of classes and saw the number of black students on campus compared to the ones at that Black Student Weekend. It was so different. When I started going and attending classes, and it wasn't just the African American studies classes, and I wasn't seeing black professors in the classrooms. When I started to get to know some of the students and the black fraternities and the black sororities, and seeing how they were treated different and how they didn't work quite the same way as the white sororities and fraternities on campus, I started to have a different impression of the school. And so I started getting involved with the Black Student Alliance. I started attending meetings and getting more involved and trying to change things. And remembering what I knew, again, very warped impression of the Allen Building Takeover, very warped understanding of what they did and what they were able to do. But felt like, okay, I can fix this. My parents did it once, I can do this. So coming in and trying to make change and realizing it was a lot harder. In some ways, but a lot easier in others. There were lots of faculty and staff on campus. There were lots of people that I could turn to, deans of the school that we could go and ask for help and explain our problem to, and they could say, okay, it's not an easy fix, but it can be fixed. Work with us, give us time. We are working on getting black professors on campus. It's hard to recruit them and get them to come here. Having students involved is helpful, so working with the professors to actually do recruitment events. And getting involved in that way was really how I got involved. And I've just stayed involved with the school ever since, seeing how the faculty, administration, and staff wanted to change. Not always successful at it, didn't always move as fast as we thought they should or could, but we're trying, we're putting forth the effort. Continued to work with them, and that's why I got involved with the Alumni Affairs Office once I graduated. My first year on Bacoba was the year I graduated. So I was first in graduate school. And getting involved with the President's Council on Black Affairs, getting involved with DUBAC, and sitting on the alumni board. All those things were working with the school to try to get those changes through, because the changes from the Allen Building got us started and made a lot of progress, but there were still things that needed to be done and still wasn't quite what I thought the school should be.
So the insider approach, the let me get inside here and figure out how to make this happen kind
Yes.
of.
Yes.
Sydney.
I was not an insider. As any administrator, current or past, in the past 4 years could attest to. I grew up in rural Oregon, grass seed country, and my mother is a night shift union nurse, and my father is a former lumber mill worker. So an incredibly working class, loving family that always prioritized sticking up for yourself and for your folks, regardless of where you are. Like most working class kids that are like smart and kind of sharp-tongued, my one-way ticket out of my hometown was to go to college. And so I applied to a lot of universities, none near my home. Of course, my mother was heartbroken about that. And Duke gave me the most money. So I was like, well, there she have it. And I guess I'm going to Duke. And I never imagined myself here. I don't know where I pictured myself at this point in my life, but Duke just wasn't on the radar when I was in high school. But as soon as I got here, I started getting involved in organizing as a first year as well, sort of baptism by fire, if you will. And I would hazard, I would say that like the '69 takeover did not only influence so deeply the 2016 events, but has influenced nearly every student demonstration that I've been a part of in my time here, and certainly students before me could attest to that as well. That we spent time in the archives, like looking over y'all's materials and the posters you made and the pictures, and it was so inspiring to be able to see what I felt like was lacking at Duke, which was a coordinated effort of students to stand up for something on campus. It felt like a very pre-professional school in a way that was stifling and not something that I expected when I came here. But to see the occupiers from '69 and all those photos and everything y'all left behind in terms of like ephemera and the archives made me think that this was where I belonged. That this was where folks are organizing for all of these values around labor rights, around racial justice, around financial resources for students, to see evidence of a time period where this was so active was like a breath of fresh air after feeling like maybe coming here was a mistake, that this wasn't where the work I wanted to do was. And it's a thread through my entire time here. And I return to a lot of those materials once in a while. But yeah.
Thank you, Sydney. So as I was listening to the first panel and listening to all of you, there are so many times that those of us who came after 1969 are like, yeah, I've experienced that. That sounds similar to my experience. And while we also know there was great change, there seems to be great similarities. And that's both disheartening and to hear y'all's victories was also kind of amazing for us. I'm trying to figure out, I have some bitterness sometimes about the amount of time that I spent organizing at Duke, right? Like, unlike other students who were allowed to be here and go to class and be free and drink, there's a lot of drinking that's happening, and party or whatever, a lot of the Black students and a lot of marginalized students felt like it was their responsibility to change the institution. And I hear some of that here. So I'm wondering, what are the types of conditions that encourage folks to be organizers and activists? When campus rebellions happen, when these moments of resistance happen, it seems like the administrators are shocked that people are sleeping out on the quad or that they're trying to take over buildings. We hear that there are certain conditions that encourage people to be activists. What are those conditions?
For me, it's my peers, so the group. For instance, as an example, a Black Alumni Association would not have been organized at my kitchen table had it not been for who was around the table. So a student asked earlier, what would we recommend? And we, same what Chuck said. You have to talk to your peers and see what it is that they think is going on and see if they have the same desires for change that you do. So getting there, because you can't do it by yourself. You can be an organizer, but you need the critical mass. So you can have good ideas, but you need some followers. And I think that, and definitely not to mention that you can't do the work all by yourself. So you also need other workers with you. So for me, if I came up with an idea and the people in my circle did not support that, I would process it to see if really am I really out in left field by myself? Am I really not thinking that through? But once you question why you're with them, if you all do have the same values and do have similar outlooks, then you need to rethink what you're doing and figure that out.
So I hear a key ingredient for a campus rebellion is to have kind of conscious people who are paying attention, being aware, and are willing to support one another in doing some organizing and strategizing.
Everybody willing to work toward that, coming up with that goal.
I hear you.
And then everybody saying, okay, what can we do?
Dr. Fuller, you were mentioning earlier, we're in the moment of Trump. Some of us would say fascism, extreme white supremacy, huge kind of class conflict, even though we're not calling it that. So what are the types of conditions that create environments where universities become sites for protests, and the neighboring communities also are asked to be in coalition with these protests?
So I'm trying to make sure I understand. Ask me that last part one more time. I want to make sure I understand.
What types of conditions create the possibility of alliance between communities that surround predominantly white institutions? What types of conditions allow that alliance to be created?
Okay, so first of all, like, I'm active in stuff that a lot of people who call themselves progressive, and maybe some of my fellow panelists would not agree with me on, right? And so I operate, Derek Bell wrote a book called Silent Covenants. And in this book, he talked about a concept called interest convergence theory. I think we actually talked about this the last time I was here with my book. And essentially what he said is, he was talking about how Black people made progress during the civil rights movement for two reasons. Number one, our own movement. But number two, at that time, The United States was trying to convince the rest of the world that democracy was a better form of government than communism. Hard to do that with Bull Connor sicking dogs on people. So at a certain point in time, the white ruling class called Bull Connor, hey man, you got to quit sicking dogs on people. Some of them thought that that was a bad idea. Some of them it was just saying because you messing up a larger framework, right? So at that moment in time, our interests converged with their interests to bring about change. But because we are coming at this from two totally different worldviews, that convergence can never be permanent. But the problem for any activist, I believe, and I hope I'm getting your question is, are you willing to live in a sea of contradictions? Because if you're going to do social justice work for any more than 5 minutes, there's no way that you're not going to be faced with clear contradictions. And so when you begin to talk about, for example, people organizing on a white campus and how that intersects with a black community, sometimes that's a stretch. Because the stuff that y'all be talking about, some of it is important to our community, but a lot of it may not be. And so the question is figuring out where is that convergence? Where is whatever it is that you all are doing, which may have supreme importance for your life on this campus, that doesn't always intersect with what is going on in a poor black community, for example, right? And we can talk about more about what does that mean, and people may disagree with me. But what I'm trying to get at is that even a lot of progressive white people who will talk about the importance of change, they don't understand necessarily the impact of race on how America operates, right? Because racism is not some tangential thing to American society. It's woven into the fabric of American society, right? And it has a certain level of permanence. So some of the things that people would be talking about fighting for make sense within this context, but it doesn't necessarily connect with the struggles that are going on out in the community, but it could. And the reason why I thought the beauty of 69 was there was this organic relationship between what was happening with the black students on campus and what was happening in Durham and in other parts of North Carolina, in part because of the, not only where you all came from, but the fact that you had been involved in the local 77 struggles and in some of the struggles that were going on in the community around community organizing, right? So I don't know if that answers, because again, I think it has to do with the period you're in, right? Because struggle is defined by theory and practice, right? So the issue is, what is the level of theory that you're functioning from, and then what is the level of practice? And then what are the connections between those two things at the moment in history that you decide to struggle?
So what I really appreciate about connecting to what you just said for Sydney and Anastasia, you all in 2016 did an amazing job at doing some intersectional organizing. It was very clear from your statements, your media releases, that there was analysis around race, even though the people who were organizing were of a variety of races and ethnicities, right? So can you speak a little bit about this intersectional organizing, how to build strong alliances with different groups, and how you all, in the everyday, like how decision-making happen around this kind of intersectional organizing?
I mean, in terms of our list of demands, like it's already been pointed out how painfully similar they were to like the demands in 69, right? Of how many similarities they were, and I think that heavily informed what we did going forward, right? Was again using it as a model, and I think very early on, everyone who was heavily involved with this recognized that like housekeepers and dining staff are our folks, like those are our people, right? Like the Durham community and their investment and be able to have homes and stopping Duke from indirectly gentrifying, right? Like the city and the power that Duke had as the largest employer, right? That it became so clear that like, especially like the labor-related issues were in no way confined to the campus. they were so deeply entrenched within Durham and the folks that we were working with. And the community and the folks that were coming from Durham and were supporting us were integral to everything that we did, right? Because as much as like the 9 of us that were in the building were like sort of the faces of it, everything that was going on behind scenes was a collaboration between an incredibly complex matrices of different people. And we understood all sort of as an organization that like, again, like no one's free until all of us are free, right? It doesn't make sense to be fighting for one thing if we're not fighting for our friends or our neighbors or our family members. And that, I think because it was established so quickly on that it carried throughout the entire occupation and onward, right? That we just all had a collective agreement that even if maybe one of these issues or demands we were fighting for didn't directly impact us, it didn't matter. Because ultimately we were all trying to get a certain type of freedom and a certain type of justice that were all interconnected. Just like race is woven through everything, class woven through everything, that these things can't be separated. You can't talk about labor abuses on Duke's campus without talking about how this university depends on black and brown labor and exploits it, right? That you simply can't separate those things. So it was like almost a second nature for us to understand everything is interlocked within each other.
One of the things it would be interesting to talk about is, we talked about the Allen Building takeover, but I don't know how much you all have ever talked about our efforts to unionize the hospital.
Yeah.
See, because once Local 77 actually was formed, and so like I was the business agent for Local 77 when we went out on strike, because I took us out on strike. And a part of it was also our effort to organize the hospital. And as Nelson knows, other people, we got red baited, which was true because it was kind of true. But I think that part of the history has got, we got to go back and connect those boxes, because that whole effort was critical, I think, to ongoing work that has taken place, since that point in time. And so, the idea that someone just mentioned to me, to having a whole week, not just to talk about the Allen Building takeover, but to talk about these whole series of struggles leading to you all's thing, right, will be real critical, because I don't think all of those things have been brought together in a way that would be important.
Speaking of interest convergence, when you get the elders in the room and some of the younger organizers in the room, and y'all try to organize together, sometimes it can be really tough. Because we have different experiences, because we have different positionalities, sometimes even different language or strategies, right? And so since we're the intergenerational panel, it would be really interesting to hear you all's idea on how we both respect the legacy of organizing that has come before us and also respect the new methods and strategies and voices and language, right, that comes up. So how do we do that kind of collective intergenerational activism and organizing?
Think about that a lot, and that may be unpopular opinion, but in my experience organizing on campus and elsewhere, I do think there's a lack of respect for people who have come before us in the middle of high stress situations as far as when we're organizing. I think I agree with Sydney about being inspired, going back to these materials and so on and so forth. But I think in the moments of kind of urgency and action, there is, or I should frame it, I would like to see more of conversation with people who have been on this campus for longer, but also people who occupy different positions in the university. So one of the things that we did with the Allen Building takeover in 2016 is working or cooperating with workers. And so actually the takeover started by workers coming to us and wanting to work with us. And so, and I think this is a little known fact, but Dr. Armstrong actually came to the Allen Building in 2016, and I was able to talk to her on the phone, and she wanted to offer advice and she wanted to offer guidance. Unfortunately, we did not have much more in place to do that. So I think, to me, those are things that we have to hold together in a way, right? We're operating under different conditions. I personally think we're able to carry out an 8-day sit-in largely due to technology and social media in the way that has enabled us to communicate called conference calls where, people are in the building and I'm on the other side of campus and be able to strategize in all sorts of ways. But I also think in terms of this investment in social media technology, there is a particular interest in spectacle, in immediate something that happens. And I think in a lot of times as younger organizers, we depend on that one thing that's going to go viral, or one thing that is particularly memorable because of the optics. But I do not think that we necessarily do a good job at thinking about strategies has worked before, but also thinking about political education, thinking about conversations with other people who may have more experience. So I think some of it is just being more invested in strategy and vision and kind of systematic preparation rather this spectacle of activism, which I think now we are in some ways almost addicted to, or that's how we conceive activism to be.
So I think that I'm like really good to answer this question because I'm sitting right in the middle, right? So on the generational, I am 25 years removed from being on campus, and have tried to be an activist and work with the students on campus to get things done over several years, and felt like I'm the old one. Yet when I was on campus, I definitely had plenty of people that I turned to and that I worked with that were older than me, where trying to work with them, they're the old ones and I'm trying to get them to understand. And it's real simple, just like anything else, any other reason why people would be getting together and trying to get something done. It really boils down to just communication and listening, and trying to hear the perspective from the other side. The younger people, whether it's me looking at my mom and that generation, or whether it's the ones in school now looking at me, the younger ones usually feel like the older ones do not understand the challenge that they're dealing with right now. Life has changed so much. The world is a different place than when you were young, than when you were here. You're old and beyond. You're not you don't know what life is like now. And the older generation is looking at it the other ways, going, nothing has changed. You're correct that, yeah, things have changed a little bit. Life is a little bit different, but it ain't changed that much. I know far more than you think I do. And just listening and hearing that difference between the two on what both people have to add. And the generational gap is, it could be a gap on anything. It's the gap between race or background, on whether you're from the United States or from outside of the country, and having a different perspective on whether things are fair, or whether things are right, and how to deal with that challenge, or whether you're from a different part of the country or whatever. You still have to listen to that different perspective, and everybody brings something to the table, and giving everybody their moment to speak and to say what they have to say, and to add that perspective or value, and then trying to figure out what's valuable from it, and take it from that and incorporate that into whatever the idea is that you're trying to get done, is what needs to happen. Yes, it's that listening. And I think it's a lack of respect in many cases both ways, right?
Right.
Yeah.
A mutual disrespect. I appreciated hearing on the first panel about that moment of male chauvinism that showed up, that oftentimes rears its ugly head in Black organizing spaces, where patriarchy is operating, some stuff is operating. And I wanted to hear about some of the challenges that you all experienced in your organizing and how you dealt with them, whether it's gender politics, race politics, class politics. How do we kind of overcome some of those moments of difference or tension?
Well, I mean, Kat sort of, mentioned this a little bit, but people need to understand how strong Kat and Bertie and Adrienne, and it wasn't like these were like docile women or anything. You know what I'm saying?
We're usually not.
No, right. But so if we go back and look at Ella Baker, right? So Martin Luther King, all them gets all the credit and all this, but it was really Ella Baker, right, who was doing the real organizing work, right? But because it was such a male chauvinistic organizational structure, those women never got any of the credit for all of the work that actually happened, right? So we're sort of in a new period, but we sort of ain't. See, the interesting thing about this is when we enter these new periods, and everybody, we're in a new period, the old period, like, surfaces, right, in the new period. because the old period never really died. It's like you never really put them in the trash can of history, so to speak. And just when we think we're making all these huge progress, the old stuff surfaces, right? So for me, the important thing is when that happens, because I spend most of my time with high school students. So when the new stuff surfaces, those of us who are older gotta be ready to be self-critical and to accept criticism for what's coming at us, right? And it's like, I remember when I was young, some dude told me, oh man, I got socks older than you. And my whole thing was, man, you need to go shopping. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, no, but you hear people saying that even today. I heard it on the campus today, over at the hospital. This dude was, oh man, I got shoes older than you, right? And so there's this whole notion that because I got socks older than you, I know more than you. Not necessarily, because you still got those tired socks, which tells me you actually don't know more than I do. But our willingness to be open to that criticism, right? And to be able to respect like where you all are coming from. And then when we still, you know, we're gonna have disagreements, but we can have disagreements but still be able to work together, right? But a part of the thing that's happened in this country is that things are so polarized that the thought of people working together to try to actually make change is such an outmoded thing, right? So we're gonna have to model what that could look like. Does that make sense? I mean, okay.
And being humble and willing to listen, because when you're talking about activism, you're talking about the challenges of people getting together. You're talking about it by design. If people are being activists, it's because they feel like they know what's right. They know that something's wrong. They're confident that they know that what's already happening is not fair, not right, whatever, and that they feel like they should change it. That's a cocky mentality to have to begin with. So that group of people that are coming together and trying to change something by design are already self-righteous, self-entitled type of mentality, and rightfully so, not necessarily in a bad way, but it means that convincing them to change is going to be, you're dealing with people that aren't easy to sway in one direction or the other. They're coming with confidence to the table, or they wouldn't be there. So it does take a lot to convince them to change, but you have to be open and willing to listen and hear others' perspectives and other sides, and realize that everybody at the table has the same motivation, that they're trying to make things better, that they're trying to do what's right, and knowing that regardless of what's coming out of their mouth at that moment, whether they're saying something that might sound a little bit disrespectful at the time, where they're telling you they know more than you, that they're doing it with their heart's in the right place, that they're trying, that their goal is to get the right thing accomplished.
Thank y'all very much. I would love to hear the audience kind of join in, questions, comments. We're waiting for the mic so that we can hear you when you speak. Just raise your hand. Tyra's coming over. And then Wanima after.
Hey, y'all. Thank you so much for your time. First, my name's Gino. I'm a junior here. And Howard Fuller mentioned a little bit earlier about contradictions in this work. And that made me think about what an earlier panelist had talked about, that President Price this morning at a brunch had been talking about just how pivotal of a moment that was in 1969, which to me seemed interesting, to put it one way, because in the past few years, at least in the time I've been here, and I've known it's been that way for a long time, university leadership hasn't taken as kindly to students who are following in that tradition. And so I wanted to kind of give y'all a platform to talk a little bit about that dissonance, and what your kind of charge is to university leadership and students to ensure that if we're really going to honor the spirit of that activism now, what is that supposed to look like, as opposed to what has happened, to keep it that way. Thank you.
It's a really good question. The really, I think, interesting thing about having an intergenerational conversation is it highlights those contradictions that have existed from time immemorial, right? Just very consistently through our time here. And as I'm ending my final year at Duke, it's become very clear to me the university wasn't made for most of us. That the core foundation of it will always be entangled in white supremacy. It will always be entangled in capitalism, and it wasn't meant to serve us, right? However, and what makes student activism so amazing and life-giving is that in spite of all of that, every day we wake up and fight, right? Every day we wake up and push administrators to hold themselves accountable and to the code of conduct that they set out forth for students, right? And every day we're growing with each other and forming a place that feels a little bit closer to home, even though it won't ever truly feel like a place that loves you like it should, right?
Right on.
And what's so frustrating is that in my 4 years here, I've been pulled through student conduct 2 times, forced to go through the process, because I've been a part of a student demonstration that was asking not for something insane or unimaginable. We're asking for workers to be able to pay their rent, right? We're asking for black students to be able to feel like if something happens to them, like the N-word gets written on the Mary Lou, that they have some sort of recourse. They can talk to the university, some sort of process for dealing with the constant racial violence they're facing on this campus. And every time the university treats us like we're an invasion, right? That we're this violent mob of students that doesn't understand how committees work and doesn't understand how to have a conversation, right? As if we haven't, for the past years, been working through those channels and exhausted them every single time, right? And so to hear Price say something like that feels so painful of how angry he got when we dared to say, we want to honor the memory of the silent vigil by asking for the same things, right? And it's so funny to be up here and sitting with folks that deserve 69, like y'all deserve so much, and it's so overdue because y'all fundamentally changed this university in ways that I honestly didn't believe was possible, right? And yet the foundation of it are still rotten. And every time students after y'all do the same things and are harnessing that same energy of believing in radical transformation, they're beat down by the administration and told, not like that. And yet, how many years after 69, they're finally willing to say, like, that was a good one. That's the one instance of good direct action. It's because they feel like they can control the narrative a little bit more, right?
They didn't say that in 69.
Exactly.
Exactly. Let's be real clear.
No, 100%. It's that memoriam they have in between when something happens to when the university can commodify it for its own value, right?
There you go.
And it's painful. And I think that's why, though, that like the work that everyone from 69 to everyone to now, to everyone, all the juniors and sophomores sitting in the audience, right, that the work that we're doing has this lineage of understanding the university doesn't want our labor, they don't deserve it, but we're going to give it to them anyways, right?
So, you made a really important point. And again, I want to go back to Derek Bell wrote this book called Faces at the Bottom of the Well. And, in this book, he was talking about this interview that he did with this old black woman in Money, Mississippi in 1964. And he was saying, look, like the white people got all the money, they got the guns. Why y'all doing this? And she said, you know what? She said, I'm old and I can't speak for everybody, but God put me on this earth to harass white people. But there was a more critical point, and you made it, and that is that if you believe, and I do, that racism is woven into the fabric of American society and it has a permanence, then the question is, just like you said, that's true about Duke, why would you fight? The reason why you have to fight is because you have to fight even when victory is not possible. Because not to fight is to co-sign on the injustice, right? So that every day, right? That's why you had to fight. Because not to fight is to say that this as Beyonce says in Drunken Love, this is okay. You know what I'm saying? So that's like a really a critical thing.
I'm proud that we were able to quote Beyonce on this panel.
Even if it's drunk
I
as
know.
it's all good.
I'll just say one thing, Gino, where'd you go? One gift of being connected to the people who came before you, to the generations of students or organizers or wherever you are that come before you, is that we have a memory, right? So how Duke operates is that they expect us to graduate in 4 or maybe 5 years and then go away. The troublemakers go away, right? The gift is to be able to look at people who are current administrators and be like, actually, I just talked to Bianca from class of 02, and you made the same promise in 02, and this is 2016. So how are we gonna like change this promise or come up with resources to actually do the thing that you promised almost 15 years ago, right? And I see that at play a lot, particularly here, but most institutions that are white supremacists and capitalists expect you not to communicate across generations or across interests, so you can't hold them accountable for promises that they made to shut you up in the 4 years that you were here, right? And so more communication, more things sitting at the table planning together allows us to hold particular administrators accountable.
And I'd like to actually just stick that praise in there right now for those like you who take the time to document some of this, who take the time to film this, because one thing that we don't do well is to write our own history. And so I want to say thank you for helping us with some of that. And we still have a lot of work to get it all down, as you could tell. And then especially if you're trying to remember 50 years ago. So you need a lot of that on the table to really piece the whole 5,000-piece puzzle, jigsaw puzzle together. So thank you.
Wani, you were going to say something?
She's coming.
Hello.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Hi. What's your name?
My name is Esther Glenn,
Hi, Esther.
and I'm a Durham educator in Durham Public Schools. But Ms. Williams actually said what I wanted to ask the panel, but also the people in the room. So the comment I heard was people came to Durham in the late 60s because of how blacks prospered in Durham. But as a school teacher, I find that I don't have the books to teach young children. I don't have the history of Durham. I would offer it to my students, but I don't. I recently came across a book about Ernie Barnes, and I shared it with my students. I also found out in the bus loop of my school that there were 4 autographed 1984 Olympics pictures, posters, that Ernie Barnes signed, and the kids never knew they existed. And there was an author who wrote a book, Between the Lines, and I was able to share it. So one of the things that I would like is that the history be written for children, because they're the ones who we really need to be teaching this history, so that we do know that history repeats itself, unfortunately, but we need the resources. And if the people in the room have the intelligence, then let's create the resources that we can teach the younger children, so, and put it on their level. They love it. When I read that book to my kids about Ernie Barnes, they loved it. And it's relevant to them because they live in Durham. They want to know about the streets and the buildings. Why is McDougal Terrace named what it is? You know, the things around Durham that they hear about, the streets or whatever, they don't know why they have those names. And so we have to take up, you know, the ingenuity, the responsibility to create literature that does preserve the history.
Thank you, Esther.
Okay, so a comment first and then a question. I'm really interested in working and hearing people do this more consistently, working with the difficulties of activism, because part of what I think is sometimes missing is a notion that those difficulties are also building blocks. They improve us, even as they're hard to live through. So as an undergraduate, I can remember being part of the struggle at Howard University to get Howard to divest from South Africa. So the undergraduate students who were working on that project had to do things like disrupt Founders Day service for the first time in Howard's history in order to make a spectacle that was big enough to get people to think about this and push them to join the struggle. And afterwards, we were very happy with doing that struggle, and that happiness helped us smooth over, sometimes in a bad way, our memory of how difficult it was to do that work within the group of students who were active. So I can remember, for example, and this is probably just another button I'm carrying around, walking into meetings and having people say, and here's the Marxist-Leninist heifer. And it took me a long time to take that in as something to learn from instead of something to carry around as a difficult memento. Does that make sense? So the question that comes out of this is, what have your experiences been with having to work through really critical differences among the people with whom you're organizing?
Thank you. I'm just the moderator today. Go for it. Go for it.
Because I don't want to talk too much, but I'll take that on because I'm still active today, right? And I'm getting a lot of criticism because of the positions that I've taken around issues like public education. Because I make a distinction between public education and the system that delivers it. Because I don't think they're the same thing. But that's just one example. I get a lot of criticism about where I take money from. I've been in groups with black people, who criticize me. Oh, you taking money from the Walton Family Foundation. And they're giving this criticism at the Essence Music Festival, and they're standing there with a big ass Coca-Cola sign behind their head, right? So you end up with two groups of black people arguing about which white people's money is okay. So what I'm saying is that there are all of these like inherent contradictions in struggle, right? And they're painful. And they're particularly painful when they take place with people who should be together. But what they allow are certain ideological or political differences to separate us, right? But it took me a long time, and I know Nelson and Joyce can get to this too, it took me a long time to be able to, this is why I talk about the contradiction, right? Because I don't know how you can be an activist in America and not deal with contradictions. So if I'm working with poor people, as I'm doing every single day in the city of Milwaukee, and I can tell you all about it, I gotta go get money for them. They don't need no damn counseling. They need resources. It's hard to get resources from people who don't got no resources, right? So at a certain point, you're sitting in rooms with people whose worldview you don't share. But you go in with a particular thing that I got to get resources for my community. But I understand when people who take, say, quote, a more radical view will say, yeah, but you can't take those resources. I can understand that, but I also understand I'm not listening to y'all because I hear what y'all are saying, but y'all don't have no resources to give my community. And so those contradictions are difficult. Let me just put it that way, right? And I don't know if we can ultimately resolve them, but what I try to do is to really understand, because I was one of the people who would have been criticizing me, okay? So, so I can't be mad at people who are criticizing me, because hell, I would have been criticizing me, right? But you get to a certain point where you make a decision that in order to get certain things done, I'm gonna live with this contradiction, but I'm also gonna be willing to take the heat that comes from doing what I'm doing. And if you're not willing to do that, I don't know how you do it, but it don't take away the pain, right? It doesn't remove that button that you mentioned, right? So I don't want to go further, but I mean, that's sort of how I see this.
There's a person back here.
Yes, Walter Branch, Evans, Georgia. I guess my question is kind of twofold. I attended Duke University in the early 70s, and at first I was going to limit my question to those who were closer to age rather than you. Um, but essentially, my question is, one, um, are the panel members and others, are, are you essentially discouraged by the amount of materialism, the amount of elitism, uh, as evidenced in today's student body population? And secondly, we heard in the earlier session about the number of individuals who've attained prominence. Um, and the chancellor of the healthcare system, members I remember who well, Gino, for instance, board of trustees, um, the assistant deans, provosts. Uh, is that enough? Is that enough in terms of the apparatus of power? I mean, that's from judging from what we heard earlier in the day. Um, that was quite an impressive and illustrious group of individuals. I dare say, when I was here, Duke University had an impressive group of individuals. But is it enough? I mean, it was a disproportionate amount of overachievers. You know, um, I can remember reading 20 years ago an article in the Wall Street Journal about, and it talked about representation on a campus, and they said African Americans were represented on Duke's campus. Southern Baptists were represented. Asians, Europeans certainly. But they made the point that the person who was underprivileged and didn't have a voice was the poor coastal Carolina white. So, I'll take my answer offline.
Okay, thank you. So I hear two questions. I hear one about the elitism of an institution like this, and the question was, are we pleased with that, I heard. And then there was a question about what is the significance of us being able to say that we have a significant number of Black students present, a significant number of Black administrators present, people who have become part of the system that in theory we are all here to rebel against, right? So what kind of is the model for success, or how do we know we've reached liberation and freedom? What does that look like?
I think one of these things was kind of what I was thinking about when you were asking about difficulties of organizing and how we work through them. And I think that remains, or at least is one of the challenges for our generation working on campus, because Duke University has, or other universities have openly embraced, inclusion, diversity, and representation as, value, right? But I think that oftentimes, while it should be celebrated and is a great achievement, takes away from the fact that graduate students at Duke were denied unionization and were not recognized as workers as the same way as seasonal and part-time workers never saw the $15 an hour, And so I think it is important to celebrate those things and achievements and representation and so on, but at the same time I think it does a particular ideological work of shifting our attention from things that Sid was mentioning before that are actually very urgent and very pertinent to our lived realities and realities of those people who serve us. So I would be, I always feel very conflicted about celebrating those achievements, about rejoicing and being genuinely happy about the opportunities that have been achieved and doors that have been opened, but I worry about the narrative put out by the administration over and over again, because to me, those celebrations and those, when we prioritize or define our achievement, our victories by that standard, we forget that that narrative is exactly what allows Duke University police to take videos of protesters in 2016, to infiltrate encampment at the Allen Building Takeover in 2016, to put students through student conduct, you know? And so all of those things are happening behind closed doors while we are putting students of color on the brochures, essentially. And so I think that's very dangerous, to just assume that that's enough.
So there's a distinction between representational advances and demographic changes and the actual kind of institutional structural change that leads to, that's at the root, that leads to equality and equity for all people who are present.
I think they're important, but that cannot be the goal.
Right.
That cannot be where we end.
Putting a black face on empire and materialism is not necessarily liberation.
Yeah, but can I speak to that? Okay, so look, man, like, black people are schizophrenic on this question, right? Because like, we say we want to have black people in all these positions. As soon as you get in a position, you say that ends sold out. So but you know how many black people still mad at Barack because they got to pay their mortgages and stuff? Because no, but I have to say it in that way because we have this deep feeling that we want us to be in these positions, but our assumption is that something fundamental is going to change because we get in those positions. And what I'm trying to be clear about is there's a fundamental difference between reform and revolution. And you have to be willing to say, okay, we got these black chances, and that's a good thing. But that does not mean that the root of the issues that you just talked about are going to be dealt with unless that black person actually has a significant change mentality, which means that he or she can't view this as a career. Because it's like when I was a superintendent, I didn't care about being the superintendent as the superintendent, because I wasn't trying to be a superintendent. Right, so I went in there saying, what can I do to change the reality of black children in this district? What I found out immediately was that I was in charge, but I wasn't in control of jack. And so the question becomes, while I'm in charge, what minimalist changes can I make? And some of us are not going to do that. You know, like we get in these positions and we're just happy to be in these positions. And so when you come to us and say, hey man, can you do something? Hey man, just wait, give me a little time for me to get to know, you know, like what's happening. Then we come back to you, well, I'm about to get a promotion, man, so give me a little time to get this promotion, because once I get this promotion, I can really do some things. Then you come back to, hey man, I'm about to retire. So, you know, no, but I have to talk about it in that way. In order for us to understand the dynamic that his question is throwing us, right? Because who don't want all of those black people to be in those positions that were mentioned, right? But what those black people have is a deep responsibility, not, as you said, just to be a black face in high white places. That you have a responsibility to be different and to move the needle for the least powerful in the place that you're in. And if you don't do that, that minimalist thing that we expected of you becomes nothing. And the cynicism and the frustration of our people becomes deeper. Because then you say, well, why did we fight for this? If you're going to get in there and ain't nothing different for us, it's the same. So it's that race-class contradiction that you mentioned, right? And we have to continue to, like, particularly those of us who assume these positions, understand that, and are we willing not to be in the position? You know what I'm saying? Are we willing to say, you know what? Because I'm one of these people, and I'm going to shut up. I'm one of these people who, like, I always go in these positions with being able to say 3 words, and the first one is kiss. Because I understand. No, seriously. I understand that in order to move the needle, I have to take that type of position. Because otherwise, they got you.
Yes, sir.
You feeling me?
Yes, sir.
But, okay, but we could.
Dr. Fuller.
Let me
Let me just clarify real quick. I was not at all indicating that these people were in here to blackface on them. I was indicating the conversation around Obama.
No,
right?
no.
So please.
I wasn't
hear
saying
you.
you were saying that. I was saying
It's
that is a
it's
truism,
tension.
though,
Right.
Because neo-colonialism is much more
I hear you.
destructive than colonialism
Yep.
in certain ways, right?
Terrain wanted to say something, and then there was a mic back here, and then Miss Catherine. Oh, okay, Miss Catherine. Go ahead.
So,
I think
Bertie.
she made the comment earlier that the fights on Duke's campus, the struggles, the things that we're being activists for is because we're fighting for a school where the school wasn't built made for us. And I think that regardless of where people get put in positions and who's in what positions and whatever, you want to feel like that you're here because this place is for you. And until everybody feels like this place is for them, that the space that they're in, that they feel completely comfortable, that's when you can stop the fighting and the activism and the stuff that we're striving for. And we're definitely not there yet. We're definitely not there if the music we want to play in a coffee shop can't be played and we get fired over it. We're definitely not there if we still got nooses being put up and we're seeing them on campus. We're definitely not there where we're feeling comfortable. We feel like this is our place, that this is a home away from home, that this is another place we can be in. People being in those positions and not changing the comfort level for everyone to feel completely comfortable where they are, we're not there yet. And so there is still more that needs to be done.
Miss Catherine.
Can we recognize Bertie?
Oh, I didn't see you. Oh, hi, Bertie. Hey! You can stand up, Miss Bertie. Can you stand up for us? Can you stand up for us? Stand up, Bertie. She's not standing up. It's nice to see you, Bertie Howard.
I think you answered my question, Howard, because the question, I wanted to stick with the contradictions, and the question was around when we become the caretakers of the system, which we sometimes do, how do we maintain that sense of commitment to try to do as much as we can? And so you did answer that. You were a caretaker, and you did what you could, and when that didn't work, I guess you left. Right?
Yeah. See, so let me try to say it like in this way. When people talk about the fact that Duke was not for us, Duke is in a country that was never. we were brought here as slaves, right? And so we got liberated, but we have never been free. So there's the constant struggle to be free. And there's different dimensions to that struggle, right? One is to try to get black people in positions that they've never been in. The other is to fight against the system that they're now in charge of. And so like as a superintendent, the one thing I understood was I had no power unless the base was organized, right? But I went in there as a community organizer. I didn't go in there as like an educator. I went in there like, okay, I'm up here talking all this stuff, but down here on the ground, my kids are suffering. So if you're gonna try to do something in those jobs, you gotta move past all of the middle and go to the people who are actually being impacted. And every time you make a decision, you have to ask yourself, how does it impact these kids? Sometimes you make a decision that people will never understand, and I understand that they don't understand it, but I'm operating with a certain level of information that they do not have. And but because you know that people don't understand all of it, you gotta be willing to take the criticism, but can you sleep at night? You know, because you know in your heart that I'm trying to do the right thing by the people that I care the most about. And so I'm trying to say, anybody in these leadership roles, that's the inherent contradiction. Like one of the problems that happened with the Afro-American Studies programs, for example, the people who fought to create these programs were too militant to go be in charge of them. So what happened was, you know, you fought to get the program, and in come these handkerchief heads people who not Mark. I want to be clear about that. Yeah, I'm in the same thing. No, but I'm just saying people came in and took over who weren't a part of the battle.
Right.
So they came in not with the same revolutionary fervor and view that the people who fought to create the programs, right? So then those programs turned into their opposite. Because the revolutionary fervor that was there to develop the programs wasn't there to continue the programs until some generation comes in and says, I'm coming at this with a revolutionary fervor, which means their tenure is going to be short. Does this make any sense at all? But it's I don't know how we get around those realities, you know what I'm saying, if we're going to continue struggling. And if you are going to struggle, as I'm sure you will, for as long as some of us who sit here with gray hair. Because I tell all young people who work with me, all I want from y'all is 25 years. No, I'm serious, because y'all ain't give me 25 years, y'all not talking about nothing. And that's just the beginning. That's just what, the beginning, right? Because what we're still trying to deal with Du Bois is trueness, right? That double consciousness that he talked about in Souls of Black, we still trying to understand how to negotiate that double consciousness as a part of America.
So we are out of time, but I want to make sure that Ms. Bertie Howard has a couple of minutes to say any remarks that you want to say. Since you're such a significant part of this, thank you for your work. And because you missed the first panel. So.
You can talk about the importance of the Allen Building.
Yeah,
One of the things you brought up.
I've been listening. Firstly, I just want to thank my friends in this audience, because if we didn't stick together, nothing would have happened. And we had our different disagreements, and we had a little yin-yang going on, but we all knew we could depend on each other. And I hope that you paid attention in the discussions that there were people who were not in the building who were just as important as those of us who were. That there were those of us who had to swallow it, stick it up, and do something we didn't really believe. And it was hard. Nobody didn't mention all them calls we was getting from our moms and grandmamas and aunties. But the other deal is when we went to court, when we went to trial, who was lined up there sharp as a tack, looking good, but parents. And so I personally challenge all of you to make sure that you raise your children to be revolutionaries. I have friends here, and I say, I met your child at an anti-apartheid rally when he was 2. I met this person because I had to babysit their daughter when she was 5, and I took her over to UNC when they were having graduation, and again, we were passing out anti-apartheid booklets. Children have to grow up in a sense of struggle, and I think that's where I got it from. I grew up in a small black town in a majority black county where there were 2 black colleges. I went to a Catholic school, and when those students were walking down the street to go to Crest to demonstrate, the nuns made us stand up and applaud and pray for them. I grew up in a condition of struggle. Every Wednesday night at a big church in our town, there were freedom songs. There were speakers. We were there to support all those folks who were in jail. When I was in the 10th grade, we didn't have homecoming because the entire football team was in jail because they had been picketing downtown because there were no black clerks in stores. And so you have to be sure that you are passing that on, that your children know, your grandchildren know, the next door neighbors know that as part of, there's an African proverb, it's not what you call me, but what I answer to. And you have to always remember that. You can't sit there and just, okay, well, it needs to be peaceful. But you know how it's already said, I'm not a docile woman. And that the women in my class, the women in my era, we knew how to take matters in our own hands. Ask some of these folks about the bridge. We ain't going there. But I mean, you just have to understand. I will say to you, when we were planning about what about Black Week, what about the takeover changed us. And for me, it was Fannie Lou Hamer. And I will never, ever, I'm 71 now, I have never met a woman with more dignity, grace, and struggle in her as that woman who had I think a 7th grade education, spoke with quiet elegance and dignity about the indignities that she endured because she wanted to make sure everybody in her county could vote. She wanted to make sure that the young kids in Head Start were going to have a step up so they could do things. And she never, ever, ever was hateful. She always was, you know. I remember I was in South Africa as an election monitor, Nelson Mandela's first election. And I met this, I was in the boondocks, and I met this woman who came from a middle-class family, and she fell in love with an ANC activist. And she married him against her family's wishes, and he moved her down into a very rural province. And a year later, right after the birth of their first child, he was murdered. He was assassinated by the South African police. His body was mutilated. And I went to a peace committee meeting, and she was seated on a stage with several serious South African police officers and some Afrikaners. And she was sitting there laughing and joking with them. And so afterward, her name was Beauty. I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. I still got people I can't even look at, you know, because of their color. And she said, I don't have time to be bitter. I have to build a new South Africa. And you have to learn that. I learned what love was because I looked at women, I looked at men, I looked at children because they had their land. They wanted to build a better South Africa, and that's what took precedent. And I think we can never forget that. And I think, again, I'm going to remember, I see pretty people here got grandchildren, you know. They know the songs of street, they know the songs of struggle. They know who our people are, men, women and men. And again, to always remember to think and analyze. And if you do all of that, we take a big step forward. And don't forget your friends. Because there's nothing like seeing all these old faces and getting a good hug. And everybody got a story. You remember when. Thank you, Mike, for teaching me how to shoot a pool cue. I'm not even going to say what I got to thank you for. But I will say that within our times of struggle, the reason we were able to go on is because we also knew how to be friends, how to have each other's back, and how to have some fun. So I look to Continua.
Can I tell one? This will be a short story. This is a very important.
They're killing me.
This is a very important thing.
All right,
I know you're okay. So, but this, I've never mentioned this publicly before. On February 13th, the Allen Building took over. On February 16, 1969, my son, Malcolm Marcus Lamar Fuller, was born in the Black Hospital, Lincoln. He had hyaline membrane, which is the disease that killed Jackie Kennedy and John Kennedy's baby. The only place in the United States of America, or at least in the southeastern part of the United States of America, that could treat this disease was Duke Hospital. They brought my son from Lincoln to Duke. We was in all of the stuff that was going on during the day. I was sleeping at night in the waiting room at Duke Hospital. You talk about a contradiction? We up here arguing with these people about Duke, and my son's life depended upon Duke. So I've never told that story before publicly, but he gonna be 50 this week.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing. So I want to thank all the panelists for speaking honestly, bravely, boldly, and I want to thank the audience for being here, being present, witnessing those stories, and engaging us. Thank y'all very much.